Welcome, David. It's just so much fun to have you here today. And you are my last guest of the year. So it's even more exciting, actually, to complete this year with you. I started with James Madison. I think I was just telling you very briefly before we started. So it's lovely to just wrap it all up with the two of you. So I was admiring the background that you had there. So I just can't help but, well, why don't we start with that and then with something audacious about David, Doctor.
Well, first of all,
David.
I'm like I feel like I want a prize, Selena. Maybe this is a holiday gift, perhaps, and I've opened it, and here I am. And for a moment there, I feel like I'm also on television, Alina, and I'm standing there in the background, and you're the newscaster reporting something, and I'm sort of standing there and going, but I'm not really saying anything. But here I get to speak. So thanks for having me on. I'm really glad to be here.
Thank you for coming
So
here.
absolutely, the background. So in the back, you can't fully see it, but that is actually a painting called Blue Fetus, and it's done by a friend of mine as I was growing up. He's an artist, and I saw this 35 some years ago in his flat, and it was there, and I was like, that is really cool. It's based on a Da Vinci painting, and it's meant to depict the fetus in the womb. And I just thought it was one of the coolest things I have ever seen. And I still think that stands. And I said, wow, how much would that be? And he's like, well, it would be this, but you're a friend, so I'll do that. And my wife bought it for me for my graduation from grad school. And so I've had it up ever since, and it's followed me around. So it just kind of sits there. And I feel like it's got this kind of Zen feeling. You know, the womb is like a special place, a comfortable, warm, free flowing and fun space, Alina. And I think that's a great way to be.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the intention that, I set or we set for these 30 minutes together. Definitely. It's fun, it's flowing, and it's free. And so that's a great start to the conversation. So fabulous. Now, what about something audacious about you that even I don't know about you?
Oh, you know a lot of things about me, Alina. So um, something that even you don't know. Well, I'll go to this one. This is something that's a little bit different, Alina. I worked at Disney for 12 years. That was a majority of my internal corporate experience, if you will. And during that time, as I grew up in Disney, if you will, and as I advanced in some roles and responsibilities that I took on, I got access to different levels of security. Now, you don't just get that because you grow, but because of the types of work I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you walked around with your badge, and your badge was essentially like a card key that would get you into certain doors in certain places. You know what? I like to think about this like the Matrix. If anybody's seen the Matrix out there, I am a sci-fi fan. And in one scene in the Matrix, they go into this back door of the system, if you will. And it's like this big hallway. It's a white hallway. Everything's white. And it's just got doors, all these doors. And because they're together and they've got the special key maker with them, they can get into any door. Well, at one point, I remember going into a different office in a different country and them scanning my badge and them saying, "Oh my God." And I said, "What's the matter?" And they said, "I've just never seen this before. You've got access to more doors than I've ever seen." And I thought about that, and I thought that was the coolest thing because I got to go into places and doors, and some were closets. And that was cool because even at Disney, closets can have magic. And going inside, I saw things, and that was just incredible.
Fabulous. Well, actually, I'm sure we can apply that metaphor to you today, having access to more doors than anybody else. That's fabulous.
I'm always looking for the doors, Alina. I'm looking for the doors in people and for people and wanting to open those doors and check them out. And sometimes we go inside and we play, and other times we decide, that's good. We're not gonna stick around there too long.
Fab. I love that. And, I think, you and I, again, were sort of talking about my intention for these audacious conversations early in the year. Really, they were born from a conversation with Mandy and James, two dear friends that, both of us share. And it was to redefine audacity, because my book was coming out in August, so now it's already out, but it is about just redefining audacity under these three pillars of courage, care, and nonconformity. So, and it sort of stayed true to that in exploring any of those during this conversation. So, which one of those three speaks to you most right now?
Well, I'm a 7 on the Enneagram, and you know that, Alina. So if you asked me that question, I'd say all three, right? Because that would definitely resonate. By the way, I've got a signed copy of your book. It's worth something, and I'm keeping it special on my shelf. Yes, absolutely. So, but if I were to choose one, probably the one that speaks to me the most naturally is nonconformity. Why? Why nonconformity? Because in some ways, I feel like I haven't fit in my whole life. And that takes me way back to as far back as I can remember some of my memories. But it also makes me think of more recently. I remember a scene out of another movie, the biopic on Queen, and when they say we're playing to the people who don't fit in, the people in the back of the room. And that's how I felt a good part of my life, because I always feel like I've been either behind or coming up against the grain, if you will, and trying to push a different way. And that's played out for me in different ways in my life. And I like to think it's something that I've come to accept more through my life, but it's something that definitely stands out. There is a strength in nonconformity, but it is not always the easiest road. That's my experience.
Yes, totally. I mean, that's my experience too. And you know my story, and you met my son Dan. Is we were in LA during the summer, and yeah, it's that thing about not fitting in and not even trying to fit in, because the more you try to fit in, the more the more difficult it is. The more you're going to stand out effectively, as we say. Talking of which, actually, I remember, because you. Why don't you tell the story of how you introduced me when we went to the restaurant, my family and yours?
Happy to, but let me give you some context first, right? And I'll say one more thing on nonconformity, right? But I think the world at times and in places likes people to conform. I mean, historically, it's even true for masses to conform. And so I think that's why when one feels like a nonconformist at times, or takes a path that's nonconformity, it's like a rub. And so that becomes a friction, and that can be what's tough, because I do think groups and the world at times, forces a level of conformity on it. Now, there can be goodness in conformity as well, but the experience can be a tough one. Okay, so context for you. So I do three things in my work, Alina, which I do one-on-one work with senior executives and entrepreneurs. I do a lot of team effectiveness work. And then I have what I'll call the $1,000 cheeseburger menu item on my menu, which is called the game. And the game takes that work that I often do with individuals, sometimes with teams, but puts it out into the real world, specifically their world. And every game is different. The game looks different for different people. So now, you didn't agree to this, and it wasn't a service that you had purchased, Alina, but as my colleague and as my friend, and we were having dinner together, I put this into a little bit of a gamified experience for you, if you will. We were out at dinner, if you remember, and we were at a fun place, nice place, and we went to sit. It was already pretty loud and already pretty busy and boisterous. And they sat us down at a table that was kind of in the middle of everything. It was noisy. It was disruptive. The server came over. He didn't seem too happy to be there. To me, those were all signs of, well, that's not going to spell the greatest experience. And actually, I won't take credit for this. It was my wife who got up and said, no, we're not having this. And she went and spoke to the hostess. And anyway, we get reseated at a table that was much more comfortable for our group together to sit. And it was great, really nice location. And then the server comes over and he introduces himself. And, he was much more amenable, it seemed, to being pleased to be there. And I thought for a moment, how can we gamify this experience? And right in the moment, I said, hey, do you happen to know who you're working with here today? There's a couple of famous people sitting at our table. And he said, no. And I said, well, this is Alina Addison. She's the famous author of the book. And I went on to quote the book. And I think we had copies of the book actually in our hands at that moment. And I showed it. And I mean, I really went on for a moment. And at first, Alina, you didn't go with it. You were kind of like, oh no, you were playing modest and not playing into it. But I kept playing it up and kind of getting a little bit loud with it. So people around us are. And then he really took to it. He's like, wow, I didn't know we had a famous author. And he stood up and we took a picture there right in the middle of the restaurant. I think you posted it. And it's a great picture that represents the launch of your book, which has been super successful.
Thank you. Yeah, there was such a fun moment. And I have to say, because I wasn't really sure. And for me, although I teach people to be audacious and, be uncomfortable, I had that moment of feeling a bit uncomfortable. The book wasn't out yet. So I had a copy before.
But it was launching. It was about to, you were in pre-launch
That's
mode.
right.
Again, that's why I felt great to have a copy right there and to be able to speak about it. But that's what we were doing. And so I just took it and ran with it. And I thought, building it up and putting it right there. But it was a great sort of publicity photo, if you will.
I know. I remember joking and saying, oh my God, David, I'd love to have you as my publicity manager. But yes, he had it was a few really great photos with the waiter just, posing with the book. But for me, it was even before, which you probably forgot, is even before we were waiting at the entrance, at the reception, and that's when you first play the game.
Well, because they were keeping us waiting. We had a reservation. They were keeping us waiting a little bit. There were a lot of open tables, and I started to think, wait a minute. And so I pulled the hostess up. You're exactly right. I started it there, and I said, excuse me, hey, do you know who this is? And she looked at Yoli and she's like, no. And I said, this is, and I went on and I started it again. And at first she was like, okay. And I was like, no, you don't understand who's here. And you're keeping us waiting. Like, really, this is really somebody of importance here. I think we should probably sit down. And we sat down right after that.
We did. And actually, just for context, I think for people and for the audience, is we were in LA. And, for me, that was my first time in LA, obviously living in London. And, LA is full of famous people. So I suppose they see that all the time when they go. And but it was fun and uncomfortable. I'll admit to that. And then but playful. I loved it.
But you were one of the famous people. And that's a difference. Sometimes when I'm working with somebody, I want them to kind of feel that about themselves. And as a struggling, I should say, initially, nonconformist, I think that's important because when you come from a place and you might be nonconforming and it's not welcome, if you don't feel for yourself first, wow, you can really, no one else may reach out and feel for you. And that can be a tough spot to be in. In fact, for many people, that probably has them shrink down and conform. Again, I'm not an anti-conformist, but I think there's power there. And I think it's important. Each of us is unique in their own way. And to bring that out in the world, I think is something that's a mission.
Totally. And actually, for me, it's dancing. It's finding that, and I don't even want to say use balance because, but dancing between the conforming and the non-conforming. And for me, I was a conformist all my life, in a very disciplinarian system when I grew up in communist Romania, and then school, and then university, and then the corporate system. And yet I was very non-conforming at heart. I only found out much later.
Do you hear the voice speaking right now, Alina? It's the voice on my shoulder right here. On my side speaking to me saying, no. What are you talking about? You've conformed completely. You went to school. You got 4 graduate degrees. You went to work. You've been in work. You worked in a big corporation. What are you talking about? But what I spit back at that voice at times when I hear that is, yeah, but I was in a band in my teens and early 20s. And that's what I wanted to do. Really, school was kind of off the radar at a time. And I was thinking I wanted to be in music, and I wanted to be a music star, if you will, a rock star. And I was in a band, and my hair was a little bit more spiky, and it was platinum, but I had that. And then I went in opposite direction. So in multiple ways, it was like being nonconformist.
Oh, yeah, no, and I can, definitely nonconformist comes to mind when I think of you, David. But tell me, I'd love to go a little bit more, deeper into the game, because you also reminded me, brought into my consciousness when we were in Italy, in Lake Como last year. And again, for context, so you and I are part of the 4PC group of performance coaches. You were the one who set up the game for us, which was amazing. I think, and so for the audience, I suppose anybody who would be interested in how does that look like, what do you love about that, and how, if anybody would want to contact you for that type of experience, what would that entail?
Well, let me just take it way back too. So 30 years ago or so, mid 90s, there was a movie that was called The Game. It was based on a book. It starred Michael Douglas. And it was probably the most extreme version. I mean, it really takes somebody who's pretty uptight but has issues in their life, like many of us do, and through playing this game that gets very out of control, he has I'll call it a psychological and or life breakthrough. That so inspired me just seeing the movie. Now the movie takes it, it's a movie, so it goes to extremes that I've never played to that degree. But the idea of bringing something out into the real world, into somebody's life, where they can both be themselves but step out of a zone of comfort, if you will, and try something else on to see how that feels, to see what it might be like. That's essentially the experience of the game. You don't know when it's going to come to you. You don't know what it's going to be. You might think you're in it, and you may be, but you may not be. But by doing so with some coaching, perhaps at the front end and in debriefing at the back end, you learn in a way that you couldn't have learned before. And so that's what the game is. The game for any person, any team, any group is different every time. And so what we did, Alina, was very much playing certain characters in the society where we were trying to figure out what was going on, and yet you had an agenda yourselves at the same time. But games that I work on for different clients look differently. I'm working on a game right now for a client who the challenge would probably be, how do they get seen more and speak up more in the world? Very expert in what they do, but from a very internalized and quiet space. And for them to be able to have more power and more impact in the world, I think playing the game that they're going to go through will make a difference in that.
I love it. I'm sure it will. And actually, this is such a great example of, conforming and non-conforming, because again, thinking about the game that we played, we all had a role, and which I think you very meticulously, God, we must, the work you must have put into, with what we were supposed to say or not say. But then there was a lot of freedom to be whoever we wanted to be. We didn't actually have to play with the rules. There was the framework, and then we could play whichever way. And this is where it all went into so many different unexpected directions.
And I love what you just captured. You captured our 3 F's, right? Freedom, flow, and fun. At least 2 of those, if not all 3 for me, are core values. For certain fun and for certain freedom. Yes, I like flow, although I can be more scripted or prescriptive at times. But freedom and fun, yeah, those are really important to me. And I think they come out in any game that one would play as they play along. You said, how could someone learn about that? Easy. Look at my website, contact me. I'm happy to talk about a game. It's davidyudis.com. That's one way. Or specifically to the game, there's thegame.icu. Thegame.icu. Those are 2 ways to just look up the game, get in contact with me, and I'd be happy to talk about the game with anyone, because I really do think it is a unique and innovative, different way to go after learning and development.
Oh, totally. The whole playfulness, and for me, is interesting. Even just as I'm listening to you, because it's one of the challenges. Again, that tension and playfulness between conformity and non-conformity. Is I could easily conform for a long time, and then this idea of bringing playfulness, I would just really unsettle me. It's like, I can't be playful, I've got to be serious. So it took me a while to it's still work in progress for me, but this is an example for me, this experiment.
I'm with you. I see a message coming up in the chat, Alina. It's saying conform or non-conform. And so Michael's asking that question, and I'm thinking about that. Again, if you ask me, I'm a 7 on the Enneagram, which means I'm the enthusiastic visionary, which means I want it all, Michael. So I'd say both, conform and non-conform. I'd say at different times. For me personally, in my life, I found that I have veered both ways as well. I have gone heavy conformist at times, but for a purpose and underneath, I'm a bit of a nonconformist. And when I've been feeling, at least, or maybe acting nonconformist, probably to some degree within that, there's a level of conformity.
Totally. And actually, just acknowledging Michael's question, conform or non-conform, I will say, Michael, and so just cross that or and we'll replace it with an and, because there is a place and time for both, and it's really learning to navigate both at different times, or even maybe at the same time, because I do think, and again, that's a conformist in me, it's important to have the rules of the game. Without some rules, I think, with the framework, it would be more difficult to play the game. And then we can choose where to non-conform with some of the rules if we wanted to be cheeky and playful and find different ways.
And Alina, what are you on the Enneagram?
I'm an 8, although I have to say, I
know.
thought I was a 7 for a very long time. I think I'm an 8 with a wing in 7 and 9. So which is why the more the conformist is like the rules, controlling. It's still in my vein.
And I said that, and for anyone listening who doesn't know, the Enneagram, right? There's 9 profiles on the Enneagram, and it's all based on motivations and how we get motivated to act in the world and behave in ways. And I called that out, Alina, because you're the controller more, the 8, because I knew that comes out. And so, yes, maybe the lean to more conform is in there, or something like that.
Totally. Yeah. So I think for me, I do have a sweet spot for the conforming part. Because of my controlling part of it. And, I think it's sort of acknowledging our dear friend Hayden, who is the expert in Enneagram, because we played with that in our community as well, who's the 8s and who are the 7s and the 5, absolutely. But let's, I know we've talked a lot about the non-conforming and the conforming. What for you right now, currently, what's probably one of the most playful, interesting, project that you've been part of?
Well, let me speak to something. I traveled to the opposite side of the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
First, I went to the East Coast about a week ago, and I attended something. A lot of these are popping up right now. I went for a very specific reason. I attended this session, a workshop all day on artificial intelligence and AI. And so I'm interested by this. I'm intrigued by it. I use it, but I wanted to know more. And so I went to this particular session. I went because it had the chief innovation officer from Microsoft, as well as a professor who leads the neuroscience department at Wharton, the University of Pennsylvania. Happens to be one of my alma maters. So I knew of this person. I thought, awesome. The session was incredible, not only because of what it shared and what's out there, but isn't yet necessarily public, but also how we, the people who were attending, could actually use it. There were a couple, mind-blowing takeaways. One thing that struck me great seemed most simple. And it was this idea that when you interact or interface with an artificial intelligence, that entity has no emotion and no feeling and no translation or internal voice loop going on when you are communicating with it. And I thought about that. Now, that may seem like, so what? But here's the thing. We all do. Every single human being has a loop that's going on in their mind. You're doing it right now, Alina, so am I. There's a voice. There's ways we're thinking about. There's inflection. What are you going to say next, Alina? What am I going to say that you have to react to? And vice versa. That goes on constantly. And I thought about that for a minute. And quite frankly, I was jealous. Jealous of, for the moment, I would love to be able to sort of shut everything off completely, to be 1000% fully focused in there. I talk about this a lot. I try to do this in my work. I try to work on this with clients, to be fully present. And there's a human way of doing that for sure. But an AI doesn't need to worry about that because it doesn't have any of that. And I thought that was really fascinating. What if we could do that to be more alert, more focused? Now, let me contradict everything I just in this way, because to be human, there's something in that changes it, that an AI doesn't have, and in my view, based on everything that's out there right now, will never have. And that is the ability to be able to put their own experience into whatever the interaction may be. And so I think that's fascinating. I will give you one real quick example of how I think that's played out in my life, Alina. When I finished my graduate studies, I was trying to get from what had been the clinical world, because I was doing clinical work at the time, and move into the pure business world, if you will, or corporate world. And I met a lot of, I would get breakthroughs where I'd get an interview, I'd get a conversation going. And a lot of the times the the hiring managers, the people I was talking to, the networking people would say to me, listen, you seem like a smart person, but I don't know, what can I do with you? And the reason for that was because what I had on my resume and my experience was not boilerplate to what they were looking for hiring that somebody else might have had. And I kept getting rejected. I'd get to the point where I'd have the conversation. I was like one of the people who was being evaluated, and I'd get rejected. That was really upsetting for a time. Like I couldn't figure it out. I kept getting close, but I wouldn't be able to close the deal, if you will. And then I realized I was always operating from a perspective of, here's what I've got. Let me tell you about it. Instead of thinking about what's in it for them and helping to translate for them how I could make a difference versus them having to pick that up on their own. So a bit of a spoon feed, if you will, that I needed to do and I wasn't doing. I don't think an AI could do that. And I didn't realize it until I needed to. And when I did, it changed the game for me.
Oh, I love that, David. And we've got Rita who's saying she's loving it, and Patty also acknowledging. So thank you for being here with us. Actually, it's lovely, sort of celebrating. But David, what you just said brought, there were so many different things that sort of started, firing in my brain as you were talking about it. But two things. It's interesting. I don't know much about AI. I'm willing to learn. And I think we had a question, you and I, earlier or maybe to me, it came to explore that next year. And it's like, oh, my first reaction was, I'm not an expert. I'll leave that to the experts. But, maybe bring people here who can talk a bit more. And you've just role modeled that. And then, the whole, I'm an expert in emotional intelligence. So for me, that is the distinction between the AI and also the human, of course, is we have the, the emotions we drive with emotions. And we wouldn't want to miss that. And you just also reminded me, I've been listening to this podcast in the last few days, and it's here in UK. It's Steve Bartlett who he's got the Diary of the CEO, so it's one of the most popular sort of podcasts. But he had I think her name was Vanessa Van Edwards, an expert in non sort of body language effectively, and that's what she was talking about, because to your point is being interested in the other person, not just through the I but the we. And her definition of charisma, if you like, how do you get picked or chosen in an interview or in a situation, is being by she has two tests, competent and warmth. And she has a lot of, the 5 principles of how are you perceived as being competent, and the 5 of how do you bring some warmth. But it's a very interesting perspective, actually, as to how just being aware of that warmth as a human and learn to dial it up when we need to.
And Patty called it out, right? And it's great to see, Rita, you're right. But Patty said, humanness or being human is not replaceable. I agree with that. And I don't think anything's going to change that. No technology. I think that will always be.
Yes, and I think, Patty, you were in the room with David and I just before we started, as I was mentioning to David, you were on one of these Audacious Conversations, and for the passion. This is how you won so many of those deals, years back. But we can't replace that passion. That will open a lot of doors. To your point, David, how do we open that many doors? That's one of the things that will open the doors. Is the passion, for sure. So with that in mind, I think we've sort of got a couple of minutes, I suppose, for us to, is there anything else that you would love to share with the audience before we wrap up for the year? I think for me, the only one thing so I don't forget, is we are going to start back in January, on the 6th of January, and my first guest will be Mandy Letter, another dear friend of ours, and I can't wait to open the next year with her. Because the other thing to mention is this, for me, this was, I was going to experiment this for a year. And it was like, okay, and then that will be it. But I'm enjoying it so much. It's the one project in 2024 that felt really easeful and in flow, that I am going to continue doing it.
Well, this has been fun, and it's felt free, and I feel like we've been in flow. I know Dr. Mandy Leto. I've spent some time with her, and she's very playful. So if you want to start the year off playing, I think that's a great way to start the year and get going. Two things I'd say, Alina. Number one is that if you ever find yourself in a space and you want to light it up, start talking about who you are and how famous you are, because it definitely worked for you, Alina, and it can get you into the key table at a restaurant if you're not already there. By the way, I never sent you the invoice for that, Alina.
You didn't, but I need you on my side. I have to say, I'm not yet there.
Not just teasing you, Alina. And the other thing I'd say, so it's end of year, it's a great time to reflect, and I'm wishing people safe, happy, healthy New Year's, because the new year is a new beginning, a new start, and all we got is this moment, Alina. So it's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. No, it's absolutely been a pleasure. And again, so I don't forget the other things in the spirit of playfulness is we have got a competition for the book, as I'm still hoping that people will put reviews. We had some wonderful reviews on Amazon, but for anybody who will put another or a review before the 15th of January, so we're living another month from here on, they are automatically going to qualify for a group coaching in February, and then have the chance to have a one-to-one session with me. So
game on, Alina.
Game on. So thank you. Merry Christmas to you and to everybody who has been watching us, and now live or later. And Samar, thank you. Happy prosperous year to you too. So thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Alina.
you, David. Thank you.